Welcome to BledTalk, the podcast where insightful conversations meet language learning. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, and on this show, we dive deep into a variety of topics with fascinating guests from all walks of life. Whether you're an English learner looking to sharpen your language skills, or simply someone who enjoys thought-provoking discussions, BledTalk is something for you. From engaging interviews to solo episodes filled with knowledge and inspiration, join us as we explore the world one conversation at a time. Get ready for a journey of learning, curiosity, and meaningful dialogues. Welcome to BledTalk. Welcome everybody this week to BledTalk. We have a very special guest. We have Bri, also known as Meio Brasileira on Instagram, and she shares a lot of English tips, and she has some great cultural advice too. And she has a really, really interesting story. So first of all, Bri, thank you for participating and coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I love your content.
Excellent.
And just so happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And so I want to go ahead and just get started with you kind of telling us your story. How did it all start? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll go back to the very beginning. So I was born in the United States, and when I was 7 years old, my dad came back from work one day and was like, "We're moving to Brazil." It wasn't an option. It was just, this is a decision. It's happening. He was transferred with his company to Brazil. And so my mom, my dad, me, and my 4 siblings within 6 months had already moved to Brazil. So after that decision. So that was a really interesting occurrence in my life. I was really sad to leave Texas, where I was born, and I had no idea what life had in store for me. So started learning Portuguese through Ivete Sangalo CD that I had. And, I was really started enjoying Brazilian culture just from afar. And then once I started school, I got really thrown into it. So I went to Brazilian schools while I was in Brazil from age 7 to 17. And after 3 months, how kids learn, right, Sam? Kids learn so quickly. And so after 3 months of being exposed to Portuguese, I was able to communicate pretty well. And after a year, I think I just had an accent, but I could say everything. And so little by little, that cultural barrier and that language barrier just started disappearing. I started noticing an accent in my English, and my dad would always make fun of me for it, and just became little by little more Brazilian. Even did vestibular in Brazil. I was about to go to college there. And then my family just decided to pick up and move back to the United States. And so that, I think, was a harder adjustment. And I moved back to the United States, and people were like, "You're American. Stop acting like you have an accent." Because my accent would show in my English. And people would be like, "Stop forcing an accent. Stop pretending like you have one." And when I would speak Portuguese in public, people would kind of look at me weird. And so then I think after that, then there was like this identity crisis and stuff. Who am I? In Brazil, I'm American. In the United States, I'm Brazilian. And that's actually where this name Meio Brasileira came from, because it was in this middle of this identity, trying to understand who I am, trying to express who I am, because I think Americans either only saw me as American or only saw me as Brazilian, and I was kind of forced to choose. And so, yeah, I think I moved back to the United States. I lost my accent in English again. And then just started, working, had a regular life in the United States after that. And just recently, I started contemplating, thinking about what my life purpose is. And I think I was really blessed with this opportunity to understand 2 cultures so in depth. So I decided I have to do something with this. And my friends, I live with 2 Brazilians, and they're my roommates. And they would make some mistakes in English that I thought were just cute and funny. And so I started correcting them and like sending them videos on WhatsApp. And then one of them had to argue in English with someone. And so I just decided to make a video about it. And I decided to post it on TikTok. TikTok didn't give me much interaction. I was like, you know what? I think my Instagram, my 300 Instagram followers would enjoy this video too. So I decided to post it on my Instagram. And then I posted 2 more videos. And then the third one just exploded. It was the I'm sorry video. And honestly, I wasn't expecting anything out of all of this. I just really wanted to share any information that I could with people. So it's been an interesting experience. I've been doing it for about a month now, and just really happy that to be where I am and to have been exposed to so many great people through it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you kind of said that, so well, you didn't kind of, you said that you went, 0 to 7 was United States, and then 7 to 17 was Brazil. And from 17 on, you were in the States. How did you maintain your Portuguese while you were in the States? Like after, because I remember when I learned Portuguese, I think I was 19. Yeah, I was 19 when I started learning Portuguese, and I was in São Paulo for 2 years, and I felt like I got really good. I still had I would say a pretty thick accent, but I was able to speak really well. And then I went back to the States, and I experienced that whole, like, I went from only speaking Portuguese to then like trying to speak English all the time. And it was really
Yeah.
hard to have that transition.
Yeah.
But also I realized that if I didn't practice my Portuguese, like if I didn't do it, actively, not that I would lose it, but my accent would get really strong and my pronunciation would turn like very American and kind of like embarrassing for me, because I was like, I spent so much time learning it, and then now I come back and it's like it just started going back down. So like, what did you do to maintain it at its level that it is?
For sure. That has it hasn't been a linear trajectory. So I moved to the US and I was in Texas, and that's such a valid experience because that's exactly the experience that I had. So not only did I have an accent in my English, but I was no longer practicing my Portuguese. And I started just because people considered me Brazilian. I was living in Texas, and there's a huge Hispanic population in Texas, from all over Latin America. But in Texas, a lot of people from Mexico. And so I started speaking with a lot of people in Spanish. And so I was speaking in Spanish. I got my Spanish better. And then suddenly I know 3 languages, but had accents in all of them and was forgetting words in all of them. And so while I was in Texas, I really didn't have the ability to practice my Portuguese. And I did feel that I was a little bit rusty. And then I moved to Chicago. And in Chicago, I found a really great Brazilian community just by chance. I met someone at a get-together party, and they were Brazilian. And then suddenly I made a Brazilian friend, and I was practicing my Portuguese all the time. And then suddenly, little by little, I was more immersed in the Brazilian community in the US. And then at the same time, working and speaking in English with all my American friends. And so I think because of that, I was able to maintain and now get to the level where I'm at, where I can speak both languages with local accents and with a local understanding of both. But that was something that I struggled with on both ends for a long time. So when I would speak to my friends in Brazil, they'd be like, "Oh, você tá americanizada," or "You're so American now." And I really was. It was a fact because I didn't really have exposure to the culture or language as much. So that was it. But now I feel like I finally achieved that balance that I
Right, you
needed.
kind of got to the equilibrium of like, okay, I can go back and forth in both and be really pretty well. I thought that I got to that like recently because just because I teach English, and so obviously I speak a lot of English during the day. But my wife is Brazilian, and she's learning English at the moment, and so we talk a lot more in Portuguese. And so like I was talking to an American the other day, an American who, has only been here for a couple months, and they were like, no, but you still have a little bit of like a little Portuguese accent in your English. And I was like, I don't think so, but
I don't
maybe.
notice it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's my point. I was like, I thought I was able to kind of maintain my heartland Midwestern accent, but
Yeah.
maybe not.
But that's
But
interesting because
it's
even
interesting.
so, that's
What was
part of your
that?
story, right? That's so interesting because even so, that's part of your story. So even if you have, which I don't see it, I don't hear an accent in your English, but if you did, that's amazing because you are an American who lives in Brazil. So
Right.
that's part of your experience. And I think accents have that amazing part of even if we don't want to show it, our experience and our identity is showing through. So of course, Brazil has become part of your identity. And that's so beautiful. Of course, if well, I wouldn't have noticed, but if I did notice anything, I'd be like, that's amazing.
Right. And the thing is something else I like to tell people is like when we talk about like speaking English or speaking Portuguese, people are always like, oh, I want to have a better accent and things like that. But I think a lot of people confuse like accents with like pronunciation. And I think that those are two different things, because obviously people have different accents. You have Southern accents, you have Northern accents, you have Western, Midwestern, and all kinds of different places. And the same thing happens in all the other languages. And so when people come to me and they're like, oh, I want to get rid of my accent. And I was like, look, your accent, you probably won't get rid of, but you can learn how to pronounce words better. And I think when people know that, they kind of relax a little bit, because sometimes people will say something and they'll be like, oh, it's my accent. And I'm like, it's not your accent. You're just saying the word wrong. It's,
Absolutely.
that's
That's so true. And I like making that distinction between pronunciation and accents. Accents, of course, are how you pronounce things. But the difference is exactly that miscommunication that poor pronunciation causes. So your video, let's say about it and eat, those are two different words, right? And so if you say one, people might understand. If you say one incorrectly, they might understand the other. But when it comes to accents, for example, there are Brazilians that have been living in the United States for years, years. Gisele, for an example, she is her English is amazing. I mean, it's equivalent to any person that's lived here, with exception to her accent. And she has perfect English. She just has an accent. There's nothing wrong with it. And she's been here for a really long time. So I think, yes, you can try and eliminate your accent, but I think there's a little bit of an identity erasure in that too. So, for example, when as someone who now speaks English pretty much, in my opinion, without a Brazilian accent, um, I think people sometimes they just think they don't know anything about me. When I did have an accent, people would always be like, "Oh, where are you from?" And then I talk about, "Oh, I lived in Brazil and all this stuff." And so through losing my accent, I also lost the immediate connection of being able to talk to people about my experience. And so I don't recommend losing accent, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, but that totally makes sense. It's something that people, like you said, sometimes we kind of look at it like there's like a negative light shining on accents, but they're totally a good thing. It's something that people need to have. Like even in the US, there's people who they just love the Southern draw that somebody has or whatever it may be. And it brings out something different in us. It gives you a way to talk about who you are, like you said. And
That
kind of,
sensation
yeah.
of like the comfort that comes from a Southern accent, when you say, "Hey, darling." Um, my mom's from Texas and she definitely speaks like that. And to me, it just brings this feeling of home. And, my grandfather speaks like that. So it brings me a sensation of home. And there's a feeling that comes with accents
Yeah.
or,
Oh, I
yeah.
understand. My mom's from Georgia, so it's the
So,
whole feeling the South. I always tell people like I'm from Illinois, but like not the northern Illinois. I'm from the
yeah,
southern part. Basically, they're like the people that want to be South, but they're unfortunately connected to the rest of the state. But
exactly.
But yeah, no, that's crazy, and kind of taking that like identity and things. So when you went from Brazil back to the States, was it difficult for you to adapt to American culture again? Or did you feel like your parents kind of maintained an American culture at home and so you kind of had both of them the whole time? Or how was that adaptation?
I think I had less of a culture shock than Brazilians that would move to the United States at the same age I did. And that's a great question because I definitely did feel a big culture shock, when it comes to how friendships are in the United States, how people interact with one another. I remember one time I was at the gym, and I was just making eye contact with people, and people were like, "Whoa." I don't know. I think, in Brazil, we make a little bit more eye contact. And I just remember people looking at me like, stop looking at me. But just those tiny things. And then obviously missing my friends and the family, not real family, but, people that I consider family in Brazil.
Right.
It was really difficult to leave behind and start over at the age of 17. But I think there was a lot of culture shock because I've lived in Brazilian society for so long, I also romanticized the United States. I remember the sensation when I moved back was that, wow, I'm in Texas. All these houses are made of bricks and they all look the same. There's no like electric cables hanging, on by the streets. There's no
Right.
graffiti anywhere. And this just almost this, whoa, this is so different than what I grew up with. And then at the same time, it being so similar to what I grew up with because of my parents. And so definitely felt torn. And honestly, a little bit bored moving back because there's so much going on. I lived in Sao Paulo, so
Right.
moving to little town Texas from Sao Paulo was a huge culture shock for sure.
That's funny because I went from like really small town USA to São Paulo. That was my
Yeah.
initial that was my initial change. So like apart from it being a whole new country, a whole new culture, it was a whole different experience of like small town, big city kind of thing. And I totally get that. And I can get how you would be bored from going from São Paulo to small town. Cause like for me, it was like, whoa, there is just too much going on right now. And
Absolutely.
it's one of those things that's cool.
But
Um,
then I think with you start falling in love with the mess, suddenly things that are too orderly, you're like, whoa, this is a little bit odd, right? I don't know if you how
it's,
often you
well,
and say,
I call it like a love-hate relationship because there's things that you absolutely love about it. And then there's things that you just absolutely hate.
yeah,
Cause like for me, right, I grew up when I was a kid, I would go outside and maybe I would see like a couple cars on the street, maybe,
yeah,
and I would play out in the yard. I was never scared of any type of crime or anything that could happen. Like safety wasn't an issue. And so, I felt good about it and I felt happy about the situations. And then you get to Sao Paulo and it's like, okay, everyone told well, before I went to Sao Paulo, everybody told me that I was going to get robbed. And I was like, that's not like the most welcoming message you can get about a city, right? And so, like, they just kept telling me all of these things. And then when I got there, I was surprised to find out that the people there said the same thing. Like, I was expecting, oh, these people are just exaggerating. But then you get there and they're like, no, they're not exaggerating. It's actually
yeah.
what you say. But the thing is, I never got robbed in Sao Paulo. So, like, I didn't
But I
have
think
this
you
experience.
become a little street smart too, and sometimes you
Yeah.
learn from other.
Well, I think when you're from St. Louis, for example, like I've told people this before, but like St. Louis is a very dangerous place. And so you kind of already get your street smarts
Yeah,
from being from that place. So like for me, people would be like, oh, Sao Paulo's probably so much more dangerous than where you're from. I was like, you've never walked through East Side. Like it's a it's a whole I felt fine. I didn't feel the danger that people talked about. But
yeah. I think the dangers in both places are a little bit different.
yeah,
You can walk with your iPhone on the streets here. You probably shouldn't do that on Paulista in Sao Paulo. Just
right.
like walk with your iPhone 5 feet ahead of you. But I live in Chicago, and there's definitely crime here too. And
Oh
that
yeah. We
you
talk
are
bad about
street smart
Chicago
because you
where I'm
have to
from.
be. There are different types of crime. It just depends on where you are.
Yeah.
It exists.
And what was that?
It exists everywhere, you know?
Yeah. And that's something that I think people like kind of forget. Because like you said, people fantasize the US so much. And I always tell them, like, look, I love where I'm from. I'm patriotic. I do love my country, but there are a lot of problems. There's a lot of things. Just
Mhm.
like how here in Brazil, I think, and this is something we were talking about before, is like a lot of times you come to a country and people like visit for a couple months and they think that they understand the culture. They think they understand what happens, and I don't think you do. Because I think,
Yeah.
even for us, for me and you, we both had a much deeper immersion and connection with Brazil, but our
Mhm.
connections were different in a way that, for example, you had your family there, so it was kind of like a hub
Mhm.
of like, oh, you go out, discover, and come back home and
For
discuss.
sure.
Whereas, like, for me, I married into the culture, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And so, like, for me, it is inside my house, and I have to discover how to incorporate it in and how I live and how I do things. Because like I said, I see so many influencers, all these gringos that like came here for a little while, and they're like, oh yeah, Brazil is this, Brazil is that. And I was like, you don't understand Brazil, like
Yeah.
on a deep
Yeah.
level.
Exactly. And I think that's, something that people like you and I, you know, there's a reason that even beyond, even knowing the defects of Brazil, knowing, about issues that the country has when it comes to corruption or politics or honestly anything, bureaucracy, um, we know what real Brazil is like, and we still love it. I think there's a deep love there for. I dream about moving back to Brazil. It's something that I think about all the time, and I don't want to romanticize it, but I think there's some beautiful things. We get to see the amazing things and the not so amazing things, and still love it. It's kind of like
It,
your partner in life. You
very
see the
true.
amazing things about
Yeah.
them, and you see the not so amazing things about them, and you still love them beyond that. So,
Yeah,
um,
I agree with that. I think something that I tell people is that I love the potential that Brazil has, if that makes sense. I tell people that I feel bad for the people. I'm not saying that the US is better in any way at this, but like just as somebody looking at Brazil from the outside, being coming in, like I see people and I see them suffer. I see them go through so many things that they don't need to go through, but
what?
some of the problems in the country cause that. And it's the
Yeah,
same way like when I look at the US and I'm like, the US, as much as we love it, like there's a lot of things that could be better. And something I tell people, for example, I was like, if a lot of Americans could just like get out of the house, like go somewhere, live there just for a little bit, just to see what it's like, I think they would have a different appreciation for what they do have. Because I really do think that I like something I tell my wife, because we plan on moving back to the US. That's the final goal. It's just because I think that because of my family's there, it makes it easier. And then also I just for me personally, I think the best situation would be like you have something that pays in dollars and you live in Brazil and pay in real. That would be perfect. But like
yeah,
like we both know from knowing the culture here, like people don't make enough here to like be, maybe comfortable, maybe basic life, but like do anything more. If you want to go to Europe or something like that, there's a lot of money that you have to save
a
up.
lot of money.
And
Here it's more attainable for sure. I
yeah,
think there's definitely
it's easier.
perks of
Cars are cheaper in the U.S. Houses are not cheap, but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
but still,
doable.
I think you can live. I've been a nanny before. It's a baba if you're
Right.
listening, you don't know what it is. I've been a nanny before, and I was able to buy a car as a nanny. That's not something that in Brazil is something that's possible, and so I think it's, of course, a matter of choice and a matter of being able to understand. I know I have a lot of Brazilian friends who've moved here and have spent 10 years, 5 years, 6 years here. Uh, and they recognize the sacrifice that it is. We have a tendency to romanticize the existence that we're not living. So I know I have a tendency now to be like, oh, I miss Brazil. I, dream about moving back there. But then in reality, I also,
And then you move back, and it's like my wife, how she misses her. She's from Manaus, right, which is in the north,
uh,
and she'll be like, oh, I really miss my home, and then like go home and be like, okay, I remember why I left. You know what I mean?
exactly.
Like and I think that happens a lot, especially like the more, you maybe you have like a brother or sister that you're like, oh, I can't wait until I live super far away from them, and then you get far away and you're like, oh, I really missed them, but then you get
Oh,
close and
absolutely.
you're like, okay, no, I need to go back. Like, yeah, like you said, you
Yeah,
can't find that change. And I told my wife, I said the ideal thing would be like to have a house in the U.S. and a house in Brazil. So like as soon as we get tired of being here, we can go here, and then when we're tired, then we go back. But I
yeah,
completely agree with you. I think that it's just we tend to miss the things that we liked and forget the things that we didn't like. And
absolutely. Do that
and
just as people, as human beings. I think human beings tend to do that.
yeah,
And
and
yeah,
then like for you, so when you were a kid going through the school system here in Brazil, um, what was it like being the American or the gringa? Like, do you think that people were just like super interested as to why, or did people ever like tell you like some maybe like not so great things, or how was it? How was that process?
the United States is a really controversial country to be from sometimes because, especially as a child, you're not making any political decisions,
Right.
And so I wasn't even voting. And I remember people would, if whenever there was an election in the United States, people would always come to talk to me about what my opinion was. And I was a kid. I wasn't, prepared to have any of these conversations. And I think, for a good reason, a lot of Brazilians have a little bit of discomfort when it comes to the United States, because of some attitudes that a lot of Americans can have, because of some political attitudes of that our country has taken in the past. But at the same time, I think there's a separation between people who live in the United States and our government, or,
Like if we knew everything that our government was doing, we wouldn't, and this is something I tell people too. I was like, look, a lot of people in the U.S. also don't agree with the same things that you don't agree with. Like,
exactly.
and I was talking about this the other day with someone because they came to me and they were like, well, because they were talking about being an expat, right? Somebody who leaves your country. And she's like, well, if you're an immigrant or a foreigner in the U.S., people treat you as like second class. But she said Americans in Brazil, they get treated like kings and stuff. And I was like, I don't think you've ever been an American in Brazil.
Yeah,
And she was like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, because here's the thing, like when you're a tourist, yes, you get treated very well, and people are like, oh, look at that, there's an American guy, super happy. But as soon as you speak the language, people start to tell you how much they hate where you're from. They start to tell you all of the things that are wrong, and they blame it on you people, right? On your people. And so it's like next thing you know, you're the representative of the United States for this group of people, and you're like, look,
I
I understand your pain. I know what you're thinking. And like, for example, I'm curious maybe if you have an opinion on this, but like here, they get really mad when Americans call themselves Americans or Americans, right? And they're like, no, it's
I've seen it on my
Estadounidense.
videos.
And
Uh-huh.
I was like, look, here's the thing. You are giving Americans way too much credit because they think that they are calling themselves the only Americans on the like you are supposing that they think they are better than everybody else on the continent. But let me tell you, most Americans do not care about what's going on outside of the United States. They're not calling themselves Americans to be like, yeah, I'm American because I am better than the rest of them.
Oh, because that word Estadunidense doesn't exist
Right.
first in English.
It doesn't make sense. I had a teacher, she was like, you have to kind of take off your language glasses for a second and realize that in English, we don't have a word for it. You know,
Right.
it's
And
either
then
American
also,
or American. Go ahead.
one thing that, I have an opinion on this because I've actually done some research into, why do we call ourselves Americans, right? In Mexico is called Estados
United
Unidos,
States of
right?
Mexico.
United States of Mexico. And so we could call Mexicans estadunidenses if we wanted to, if we were to do it that way, or Brazilians, República Federativenses. That's not how people get their name. That's not how
Right.
countries get their name. And so, yes, we are American when it comes to country and also when it comes to continent, just like Brazilians. And it doesn't have to be something that offensive, but I understand why people take offense to it. I understand that a lot of Brazilians have felt belittled by Americans or by the United States actions as a country. But I don't think it's representative of us or
No.
me or you,
Right. That'd be like me looking, like if you looked at like the past of most countries, you'd be like, wow, these are some really dirty individuals that did some
right?
things. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing, like you can't judge everybody off of what their government does. Like for example, like I said, when an American calls themselves an American, it's not because they don't like you. It's just because for us that is the most natural and common and really only way we can call ourselves. And
Right.
most of the world agrees. That's the thing, is like it's not like we decided that this is us and everybody else has to respect us. No, it's just,
Including a lot of people in Brazil, right?
yeah,
Like, ele é americano, ela é americana.
right.
That's how people call me in Brazil too. So,
And like
um,
I had an Uber one time with a guy who he was we were talking and I said that I was an American and he was like, well, we're all Americans, right? And I said, when's the last time that you called yourself an American outside of this type of conversation? And he
yeah,
was like, you're right. And I was like, yeah. I was like, I've always been like, that's just the name that I've had since I was born there. But
that's
like, I'm
very,
not saying that you're not South American and I'm still North American, but like on a country level, you know,
and I have a lot of people saying, you're North American, stop calling yourself American. But that's equally ignorant if you're going from that.
So are Canadians, right? So are Mexican.
Mexicans and people from the Caribbean would also be American, and then I'd be leaving out other people. So I figure I'm American from a country standpoint, and I'm also American in the same way that Brazilians are American.
I completely agree with you. I think, but it's a conversation that a lot of people are just not ready to have yet. But
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
listen to it, they'll tell us their ideas, I'm sure. But um,
I've had some people talk to me in my DMs about it, and some people who have genuinely come to you know, asking me questions, came to me asking questions, and they said, like, why would you do that? You don't seem like this type of person who is what people would assume. You know, you don't seem like this entitled person that's saying, I'm American. So if you don't act that way, but you're saying this, why would you do that? And I've responded to them very kindly in the way that we've talked about here. And I really appreciate that when people are willing to at least ask or have the dialogue before making those assumptions about who I am and what my values are, because yes, I'm from the United States, but that doesn't mean I agree with everything my government does.
right. I was like, one of the most American things that exist is like not trusting your government. Like that is, I always tell people, I was
You
like,
live in
look, like
Texas, there's a
most of
tell that.
us, I was like, you should have seen the U.S. during the pandemic because it was like the government was like, do this, and everyone was like, no, like it was like they would not trust for different reasons, but like it's the whole. That's just how we are. But and if you look at our history, that it comes from the beginning, right? From the start of the United States of America. It all started with a group of people that were like, we don't like the government, and that's just how we
They
built
are.
ourselves, right? We built ourselves on
That
like, we don't like this. We very big on the whole small government thing, and so yeah, no,
hurt.
I appreciate your conversation on that because I think that a lot of people, like I said, they have their thoughts on it, but they haven't seen the other side of it. Like,
Right.
how do you feel whenever someone tells you that you're not what you say you are? You know,
Right.
it'd be like
Absolutely.
it's like someone being like, "Oh, I'm Christian." They'll be like, "No, you're not. You just believe in Jesus." And you're like, what do you mean?" Like,
Yeah, exactly.
okay. So it's like
Or,
making,
making assumptions on your beliefs too. Like, oh, well, you think you're the center of the world. No, I don't think that way. Where did you get that from?
yeah. So kind of like along those lines of things, how would you tell someone to approach like hostile people when it comes to a new culture? I don't know if that's the right way to ask, but you move somewhere, for example, any Brazilian that's listening to this and they're like, I want to go to the US, but I've had a lot of friends say that, that Americans act this way, or that, or, maybe that I'm not going to feel welcome, or they feel super isolated. Like, what's some kind of advice that you would give somebody to adapt and kind of
For
fit in?
sure. I think that type of criticism and judgment happens no matter where you move to. So just as a species, I feel we are always questioning the things that are different because we're not familiar with it. Like you said, like we were just talking about, there are some people that don't like Americans in Brazil, and we've had to deal with that. In the same way that in the United States, there are some people who don't like foreigners. I'm not defending them at all. I don't think it's correct. But it is something that I've had to deal with. So, for example, when I was in a lunch line with my sister in high school, and someone looked back at me when I was speaking Portuguese with my sister, and they said, "Ugh, as if we need more foreigners here." I think I felt that for the first time. I felt that truly coming from an American, and so I understand that it can be difficult for people to deal with that, and so I would say you're going to face criticism anywhere you go. And I don't think that's good enough reason not to do it. If you want to do things just because they're going to be easy, or just because no one's ever going to disagree with you, or no one's ever going to wrongfully judge you, then you wouldn't do anything at all. If Sam, if you were to never face judgment, you wouldn't be on the internet,
Right.
And so I think, yeah, but it's just a matter of how much you internalize other people's feelings about you. It's a matter of justifying on a daily basis. I'm okay. I can be here. I'm deserving of this experience just as much as anyone else. And my accent doesn't make me less than, or my, the country that I'm from doesn't make me less than other people. So I think that's the advice that I would give, and that it takes resilience, but it's worth it. You're expanding your brain. You're learning a new language. You are learning how to express yourself differently. I tell people, I express myself when it comes to love in Portuguese so much better. Like, I don't know why, but when it comes to saying loving words, I suddenly have an entire new vocabulary of words with which I can express myself and feel, because what we say and the language that we use also affects our thoughts. And so I experience new sensations because I know how to speak new languages,
Yeah.
And so open your mind, go and do it, of course, and don't let people with closed minds limit you.
Right. Don't let the other people affect you, right?
Sure.
Just do
Do
what
you
you
feel the
have.
same way?
I feel the same way. I feel, because something I think it's interesting is that I think something that's important is if you have somebody that's there to hear what you have to say, then it makes a world of a difference, right?
Mhm.
I can come home and I can tell my wife and be like, look, this person said this thing, and I don't know why they wanted to say that. I don't know why they feel this way. And she doesn't even have to really give me an answer, but just someone being able to hear how you feel, being there on your process through adapting, I
Mhm.
think makes a world of a difference. Like, it's one of those things where, like you said, you just need to realize that you deserve it just as much as everybody else does. And making sure that you have somebody there who believes that you deserve it as well it's not necessary, but I would strongly recommend it, because I feel like
Probably.
having that base would really help. Because earlier we talked about like culture shock, for example, and I think a lot of people don't understand what culture shock is, because we say culture shock, and I think people think of like, oh wow, this is all so crazy, right? But like,
Think of the surprised emoji,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And the thing is like, culture shock, when you look into it, is when you start to have negative feelings for the place that you are. And I was like, that is so interesting, because like, now that I've seen the definition, I used to think, oh, I didn't go through culture shock. But then after I saw the definition, I was like, I totally went through culture shock.
Of
Because
course. Yeah.
what happens is that I always tell people, your process is you get there, you love it. After a
Uh-huh.
little while, you start to hate it. And then
Uh-huh.
after a while, like you said, it turns into like a relationship with someone that you really love, because like, you recognize the parts that you don't like, you recognize that there are faults, but you also
Yeah.
know that there are good things. And so you
Yeah.
kind of work on learning how to respect for example, the culture. There may be things culturally that you just can't accept, that you just don't like. And it's not that you don't have to believe it and find a way to justify it. You just need to accept that's part of a different culture. And if that's not
Good.
something you want in your own personal culture, then don't put it there. Um,
Yeah.
just kind of move forward with that. I always tell people, like, one big one for me is, like, I don't know about you, but at least in the US, like most of my friends, our moms would get super angry with us if we cut somebody off from talking. And so in the US, it's very common for you to wait for someone to finish talking and then you start saying what you want to. Now here in Brazil, it's not, I don't think it's considered rude. I honestly don't think it's considered rude to cut somebody off, but they cut you off when they feel like you've expressed your idea. And
Yeah.
and the thing is, and if you don't cut somebody off, they keep talking. Like, they will just keep going until someone cuts them off. And so,
Necessary
like,
part of
yeah. And so
language.
for me, that was something I just had to learn how to do that. I told my mom that she had to do that because she was working with a conversation class one time. And I could tell that she had difficulty trying to interact because she was waiting for people to stop talking. But this lady just
Yeah.
kept going in circles and circles and circles. And I was like,
Oh,
Mom, you have to get there and be like, okay, let's do this. Because that's what they expect. And I always tell people, it's not bad and it's not good. It's just different, you know?
yeah. And that's how I would say these two experiences in my life have been. It's just, I don't think Brazil is better than the US. I don't think that the US is better than Brazil. I think it's just different. And it's just a matter of choosing, choose your poison. Which one do you want for
Right.
your life?
Which one gives you the most, for what you want in your life? Because I know people, and, we can kind of, because we're getting close to the end, but,
Mhm.
I think people need to realize that we all have different personalities. We all have different things that we like. And so you can't say that this is better for everybody, right? I know a
Sure.
girl who she absolutely loves Brazilian culture, like 100%. It's her thing. She's married to one of my friends who is American and he wants to move back to the US, but she absolutely loves everything about here. And I always tell people, I always say, if you're like 100% in love with Brazilian culture, the United States culture is going to be very difficult for you. And so it's
For
one of
sure.
those things where you kind of have to, you have to give up a little bit and see what you're willing to mix. Because if you're not willing to accept a new culture and a new thing, then it's just going to be miserable. You're not going to be
Yeah,
happy.
don't force yourself to, I think also when it comes to language learning, there's that cultural aspect of language learning. And, what are you truly using your English for? Are you using it to make friends? Are you using it for business? You also have to understand the mannerisms in the way that people are in those different settings. So I think, for example, if you cut someone off in a business setting, that might be really poorly seen. In a social setting, people might not care, but in a business setting, that might be disrespectful. And so I think alongside the language, we also have to teach culture. And based off of that, you can, also decide whether you want to move or whether you want to continue to interact in those settings.
Absolutely. It's important that you just try to keep an open mind, right? And try and see
Yeah.
things the way that they are and not how you want to see them.
Yeah.
And I think
It's a lot more
because,
complex than we'd
yeah,
like to think.
there's so much more than just like, oh, I'm going to go to Brazil, right? If you go to Brazil, who are you going to go with? Like, how long are you going to stay? What's your goal? What's your plan? What are you going to do? And some
Sure.
people don't have those goals. And I always tell them, make the goals first, before you
Yeah.
do anything. It's like, that'd be like going out onto the road and then deciding where you're going to go after that. It doesn't work,
Right.
right?
I think the American dream somewhat exists. It's just a matter of you have to be prepared, right? Don't just show up here and just like a life in Brazil that's amazing also exists, but you can't just move there, move to Brazil with no plan of how you plan on sustaining yourself, in the same way. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I would say. Definitely have a plan, have a support group, have people that that love you, that are willing to help you through it because it's an adjustment and culture shock is a real thing. So
It's real and it hurts, but it's necessary.
it
It's good. I would say,
feels like betrayal.
Right. Culture shock is a beautiful pain, right?
Yeah,
It's just something that it changes who you are and makes you better afterwards. It's the whole refiner's fire kind of thing.
absolutely. And I think we're past that culture shock now to where we have that love for Brazil, that it's not like, oh my gosh, I spent 2 weeks in Bahia and now I love Brazil and I know how Brazil is. Uh, it's it's not like that. We know the country.
It's a deeper connection. It's something,
It's a deeper
right? It's
connection.
not when in terms of like relationship, it's not like just going out with somebody. It's the whole like
Yeah.
I've been I've been here for so long and I genuinely appreciate the things that are here.
It's a
Yeah.
commitment, right? And
Yeah.
I think your commitment to, I don't see it from a lot of people from the country that we're from in the United States, who are so committed to learning about another culture. So I think that it's really admirable that you show the interest and the passion for Brazilian culture that you show on your page. And so I really admire you for that, for sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
But like I said, we're getting close to the end, and I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show and for sharing your experiences. And I'm sure there's a lot more that we could say. And who knows, maybe in the future, if you're willing to, you can always come back for a part
Yeah,
two. And
cool.
maybe even the people who are listening, if you guys have questions or anything, you can comment, you can send us messages, and maybe it'll be enough that we'll have to have another another conversation to respond to them. But thank you, Bri, so much. Do you have anything you want to say before we close?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you if you're listening. I really would love to hear your feedback on this conversation. It's just between us, but I'd love to hear what you have to say too. So, um, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and I'll have all of Bri's information in the comments. I'll have her Instagram and all of her other channels and things for you guys to be able to follow her and continue learning English and culture with her as well. So everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on BledTalk. Thank you for listening to BledTalk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. Don't forget to send in your questions and your suggestions. Thank you once again, and have a great day.